Hello guys, my name is Tom Antos, and in this video I'm going to show you how I created this crowd shot, even though in reality nobody actually showed up when I entered the stage with my guitar. So this is actually for a music video I shot, and as you can see, we did not have all those, hundreds or thousands of extras that I have in the final shot. Instead, we had a stage with, the seating, but it was empty. And we had the singer here, and I had to kind of make it look like it was filled with a crowd of people cheering him on. So the first thing I had to do was to get this kind of a shot here, as you can see. It was on a gimbal, shot on the Sony a6500 and the Mozilla Air gimbal. And it was, as you can see, just a singer with empty seats there. And that was going to be my main plate that I was going to work off of. So once I get the shots of the singer, then next thing I need to get is to get different shots of people basically cheering. As you can see, me there, little cameo. And it's a simple shot. Things you want to remember for this is you want the camera to be locked off so it's not moving. And also you want to make sure that your green screen covers basically where the action is. So you see there where this guy kind of stepped out a little bit outside of the frame. We had to redo that, make sure that he didn't do that. So we put different marks on the ground, and we told people to make sure to stay within this kind of a box that we created. So that we ended up with shots, for example, like these ones here, where as you can see people are staying, or at least all the action is staying within the green screen. Now for the green screen, you can literally use anything. You can use a piece of fabric, you can use a wall that's painted green, anything like that. We used a big kind of a fold-out green screen that we had. Now also you'll notice I have these kind of the frames for that green screen visible in the shot, but again I don't care because I know I'm going to cut this out or create a garbage mask. So as you can see, we just got different versions of this crowd here. And then, once we had these different versions, I also ended up getting some single shots of people, just so that, I knew that in case I needed to put one kind of or two single kind of people there in certain places to fill in the stage, then, I had basically versions like that. So you always want to cover your bases and get extra shots or extra different versions. And that's pretty simple to do because once you set up this one shot, then you just replace the people and you have them kind of step in there. Now you do want to make sure that you put markers there on the ground because those markers are going to make sure that you see like this guy here end up going off to the side. It's going to make sure that basically nobody goes off screen like this. So you don't end up having to rotoscope them here frame by frame. So once you have all of your footage, just import it into After Effects and we can start working on it. First thing you'll want to do is to track the camera in case the camera in your shot is moving. If it was a static shot, as in the camera wasn't, especially moving in space, as in like left and right and that kind of stuff, or dolly, then you maybe wouldn't have to worry about it. But in this case, because the camera is, like I said, moving on a gimbal, we want to track the motion so that whatever we put in onto the seating area there is going to be automatically going to have that motion of the camera. So the way you do that in After Effects is you go here to Animation, you go Track Camera, and it's going to start analyzing the camera for you. But here's one thing to keep in mind. While I kind of let this analyze in the background, depending on the footage that you have, sometimes just tracking the camera like this might not work, and that's because you need some information in the shot, some details that the software can track. And as you'll notice up here, this shot is kind of, first of all, it's kind of low contrast, but also it's very dark. So there's not a lot of places, and also even here on the stage, a lot of it is like out of focus there, and those lights. So there's not a lot of points or details where the software can use to basically to track the camera. And so just throwing a camera tracker onto this kind of footage is not going to work for you. And here, let me just show you kind of what results we end up getting. Now here, it finished tracking, and actually look at this. It shows us 3D camera tracker, layer size, mass match composition is what it's saying. And that's because I'm working on the final shot is going to be in 1080p resolution, but the shot that I actually got in here was in 4K. So first thing you want to do is actually, when you put your shot in there, is to pre-compose it. So I scaled it properly already. It's scaled to 50%, but I'm going to right click now on the footage, go pre-compose. And in here, if I bring up the settings, I'm going to basically click this little button, so move all attributes into a new composition. And I can name it, for example, the singer, so we know what this layer is. Singer, and that precomposes the layer. So now if I double click on it, we have another composition here called singer, which actually has our 3D camera tracker and all that stuff. Well, now I'm going to go back to our here previous composition, and I'm just going to go right now. And so again, I'm going to right click on this and go track and stabilize, and I'm going to choose the track camera option. So again, it's going to be analyzing here in the background. And again, I'm going to show you guys what results it comes up with. So here it is, it finished tracking, creates these little points up here for you. They're kind of showing you what points it was tracking. And you know, it looks like not much has happened, and that's because we have to now create a camera. So here in the 3D camera tracker, we'll click create camera. And then you'll notice here it creates this new layer called 3D tracker camera. And again, you won't see much of a difference, but I'm going to go here into our two horizontal views, and this one is from the top. And I'm going to go here and here is go fit. So here, as you can see, it created our camera. So this is the actual camera object. As you can see, this one. It's this little box with the triangle that kind of shows you where the camera is looking. So we're looking basically from the top. And we know in our shot that the camera is just kind of moving smoothly back. But notice here, this is the path that the camera, the soft camera, is taking. So if I kind of scroll back, you can see it goes back, but then it goes left, right, back, forward. It's kind of all over the place. And that's because, again, there was not enough information for the camera tracker to basically to be able to pull out of the shot. And it's because the shot is kind of lacking contrast and, you know, it's kind of dark and stuff like that. So what I'm going to have to redo with this is I'm going to delete this camera. I can turn this effect right now off, the 3D camera tracker effect. And I'm going to double click on this to go onto our pre-composed footage. And then here, I'm going to adjust the footage. So I'm going to go into, for example, color correction. I can go into brightness contrast. So I definitely want to make it brighter and increase the contrast. That's mainly what I want to do. So if I do something like this, you can see, first of all, we're getting a lot more information now. And let me go, yeah, brighten it up. I can also go into, for example, levels, for example, even. Or you can even use another one here that they have, which is shadow and highlight. So, for example, if I wanted to bring up a bit more detail there in the shadows, then you can leave it to auto amounts, or you can just manually adjust, for example, the shadow amount. So right now it's set to 50. So this is before, this is after. So it definitely brings up more details there in the shadows. Now it doesn't look pretty, but this is just so that the camera tracker can actually get more information. So now we go back into our comp, and I'm gonna go again to our 3D camera tracker, and I'm gonna click analyze. And again, I'm going to leave it till it's done analyzing. So there, it's done solving our camera. And again, now we're going to create the camera. So again, go to the 3D camera tracker, create camera. And we're going to look at what it created. So you can see it created the camera here. It's got this giant triangle, meaning it's like a really, kind of a telephoto zoom lens. But it's also showing us here the path. So if I look at the path, you can see here, it's kind of going backwards like this. So that's, and it's going smoothly, right? So just kind of backwards. And if I look, for example, from the left, again, I can see here our camera. It's kind of hard to see. Let's see if we can zoom in. See, the problem also here is that it's kind of like, it's really large, this camera and this path. And that's because it doesn't know what scale to create. But as you can see, it kind of just moves backwards in a smooth motion. So what we can do now is we can go back to our effect here, or our pre-comp layer. We can turn off all of these, effects that we did where it makes the footage brighter, since we don't need to do that. Or we don't want the final footage to look like this. And now the camera, we can basically take this now and we can kind of scale it down. Before we do this, I'm going to also though create some points based off of the tracking points that we have up here. So by selecting the 3D camera tracker effect here on our footage, we can see, for example, these points here. So I'm going to just go back to one view. And I want to create basically, it could be a null, could be an object, but somewhere here, basically these points that are where his head is. So I'm going to select somewhere, basically go in between these 3 points, right click on it, go create a null object, and it creates basically a null over there. Now if I look at this, even our two views here, and I go to basically to select our object. Where is our object? It's somewhere there. So you can see, first of all, it's very kind of, again, difficult to see it, but you can see this object is right here, and we can scale it up, for example, so you can just see it more in this view here. I'm going to go actually back to my tab view, and here's our null object. So it's basically like this little square, and you can now, and it's basically floating in 3D space. So now what I can do is I can adjust its rotation, for example. So I can take the rotation tool here and, for example, rotate it so it's kind of facing the camera, maybe more. Rotate it like this also. And now definitely I want to make the scale smaller. And basically you just want to kind of place these objects in your scene so you kind of get a sense of where everything is taking place. Now I'm going to go back to my tool here and basically place this over the head, and then as you're scrolling now, that square should stay basically where the head is. So that kind of is going to give you sort of a guideline of where your singer is in 3D space. And then you can do the same thing for using some of the other points that the thing tracks. So for example, we have some points here where the crowd is supposed to be. So we can again create a null. Maybe I'll create one here for the what's it called, for where the light is and that kind of stuff. And when I'm finished, you can see I end up with this kind of these kind of points here. So I have one point here for where the crowd kind of begins, and then another point here in 3D space where it ends, and also where his head is. And if we look at the view here, again, our two views, you'll notice now in 3D space, this is how everything's looking. So here's the camera, which I'm going to scale down just to kind of make it more manageable so you can see it. So here's the camera. Then here is our our head basically object. So it's obviously here in front of the camera. Then our next point is here, which is the beginning of the crowd, which you can see here. And then our last point is somewhere way out there. Now here's again the problem is, like I said, with the scaling of this, is that it's just all over the place, and we kind of want it to be more or less there in the center where our stage is. So what you can do is you can create another null object. So go here, new null object, and we're gonna create basically we're gonna maybe just rename this so it doesn't get confusing. We'll call it God node, and we're gonna take our three nulls that we created that represent the different points in our scene, plus our camera. And we're going to whip here, basically pick it and link them to this God node. Now what that means is this God node, actually wait, before I do that, I have to make this God node a 3D object. So you see here you have the 3D layer, I have to enable this. Now I can link it, and I link it to this 3D null, and now I can basically take this null and I can scale it. And as you can see, as I scale it, it scales the whole scene basically down. So I can go now here, and I can even move it in space. I can, for example, move this here, so our camera is somewhere there. And then, for example, here we have our scene. It's a lot more manageable. Our point, I mean, that corresponds to sort of where the end of the crowd is going to be. So you can kind of see that now it's just easier to work with. I can zoom in, see the details better, that kind of stuff. So again, and then once you've done that, by the way, you can then delete the God node because everything's already scaled, so you don't need to worry about it. So if I select the camera now, as you can see, here's our camera, moves nicely back. Then here's our object here, which is our head object, the null. It's right here in front of the camera. Then behind that even further is this kind of another null object, which represents the front of the crowd. And then even further is the last point, which is more or less where the end of the crowd is going to be. Once you have this and you have this camera nicely tracked, next thing you want to do is you want to start putting in your crowd. To do that, it's very simple, and I'm going to kind of take you and show you how I did one of the crowd shots, and then you just basically repeat it for the other ones. So once again, you import your footage here into After Effects. You have this clip here, and you select, you want to kind of select a section of this footage where, again, the camera is not shaky, nobody's going behind or over, basically past the green screen area. And also, I would say you probably want to choose a section that's a bit longer than your actual final effect is going to be. So this way we can offset this later on and kind of make it look more varied. But anyways, we take your footage, and the first thing we'll do is we'll just apply a simple green screen effect. So right click on it, go to Effects, Keying, and go Key Light. In Key Light, you select your little color picker here, select the green. As you can see, it did a pretty good job. If I kind of show you this background, you can see how good it looks. You don't have to really do much with it, especially because this crowd is going to be so small that you're not going to see much detail. But if you really wanted to clean it up a little bit, and you can go here, let's say here into Combine Matte, you can see there's a little bit of these gray areas here. So we can go, for example, to the Screen Matte and go clip the black a little bit. And that's pretty much it there. So now we'll go into our final result. And the next thing we want to do is take the pen tool and create a garbage mask, because like I said, everything that's outside of the green screen is still visible. So we'll kind of mask out this shot. Let's see, here somewhere, something like that. Here, and here. And there we have it. Here's our beautiful shot of the crowd. So, very simple, very quick job. Now that you've done this with this one crowd shot, you want to basically duplicate this timeline or create another timeline or composition with, again, the other shots of the other crowds. And here I already did that, so I have my other kind of crowd shots, as you can see here, other people clapping, and I have 5 versions of this. And the reason why I have 5 of them is because I would say the more varied kind of groups of crowd you have, then the better the final effect is going to look. And that's because you're going to have less people or less of the same kind of a group of people repeating in your shot. So it's going to look more organic, more realistic, less repetitive, right? So now we go back to our main composition here, and we're going to just start putting in our crowds in here. So we're going to take our crowd 1 layer or our composition, and we're just going to drag and drop it here into our shot. As you'll notice, it's way too big. Also, it's a 2D layer. So first we got to make it a 3D layer by enabling this little point here, which makes it even bigger. Now, part of this is the reason why it's so big is because, again, when you look at it here from the top view, you can see we have our camera, then we have our here object that represents our singer, and then right behind that is this giant layer, which is our crowd layer. And then behind that, even further, is where really the crowd should be starting. So we want to make sure that we move it past basically this null, the null that represents our crowd. So we'll move it back in space, somewhere there. Now it's still ginormous, so we'll bring up the scale and we'll scale it down to, let's try 2. Yeah, and I think that's about right. So now you just kind of want to basically go in and adjust the position of your crowd. So place it somewhere here in your shot where it just looks good. And now you can preview it. So just click here, and yeah, it looks like our little crowd is there, and it looks like it's actually there, part of the shot. What I mean by that is it's the camera is tracking properly. It's actually moving away in 3D space. Now, obviously, the color doesn't match. We're gonna have to kind of cut it out so it looks like they're slightly behind the edge of the stage there, things like that. But we're gonna worry about that later. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start duplicating our crowd. And again, this is very simple. Just go Control D and just start moving it in space. So we know that this first row is going to be more or less just this kind of line of people. So I'm just going to start duplicating it here, and again duplicating it here. Just going to start moving it along basically the front of the stage here. Now you'll notice that right away the problem is obviously this crowd here is supposed to be disappearing behind the singer. So we're going to have to rotoscope him. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do it exactly frame by frame. I'm going to show you some shortcuts in a minute once I'm done here duplicating this crowd. And there we go. We have our first row of our crowd. Now they all look identical, and actually they're all going to be moving at the same speed too, which is not right. Here's basically how the shot looks when I preview it. So definitely, it looks, like I said, repetitive, and also the motion is identical, right? Plus, I noticed that here at the end, when the camera moves further away, there's a little gap here on the right side. So I'm gonna fill in this gap and very quickly again. Just gonna go here to the end of the shot. Again, Control D, move this crowd. Next thing we'll start doing is replacing some of these crowds here with some of the other crowds that we have. Because like I said, we have 5 different versions of the crowd. So I'm going to just go into, for example, like this one here, crowd 2. And I'm going to dump basically or replace it with crowd 2. And the way you do that is very simple. You select your layer here in the composition and then go to here, crowd 2, and click basically Alt. And then you drag it and while holding the Alt button over this layer here. And when I do that, you can see now it replaced that crowd with our other crowd. And so I'm going to kind of go now one by one and just replace it with the different things. So again, press Alt and drag and drop it while pressing Alt onto the next here clip. And again, replace the next maybe clip like that. Maybe this one again, we'll replace it, but we'll replace it with crowd number 5. So you kind of want to vary it, right? We can leave this one there maybe. Here again, we'll replace it with crowd 4. Next one is going to be again crowd 2 here. Maybe we'll place it. Maybe this one, place crowd 5. And you just kind of want to go one by one like that, and just, like I said, just vary it up by placing different crowds in different places. This one maybe we'll do crowd 2. So there we have it. We kind of placed it up. Varied it. We have different crowds now. It's not the same. Plus, we can also, we still have some of these crowds that repeat. So we can also offset them. So we can just offset it by moving the timeline. So the timing isn't, always identical. So offset some of these layers. So some of them are, a lot further this way. Some of them just a little bit. So that's the kind of stuff you want to do, just to kind of vary it. And now again, we're gonna preview this, see how it looks. To preview it, just so that we're not spending so much time, I'm just gonna do a quarter resolution here. So there you have it. As you can see, it's, it looks a lot better now. It's not as repetitive. There's different motion, different groups of crowds. There's still some little gaps here that we can fill in by kind of, just basically putting these layers a bit closer. So just to kind of make it look like like it's a bit more of a busy crowd. And this can be quickly done, just again by dragging, and dragging and basically duplicating these different layers and just kind of moving them around. So it's very fast, very intuitive. I'm just gonna move these around like that. Maybe move this closer, move that one there. So there we have our crowd. Now, obviously, the problem is, like I said, our singer here is the crowd is going over him, and he's in fact supposed to be here in the foreground. So we have to do the painstaking job of rotoscoping, but we can make it a little bit faster by actually using our 3D tracked data. So I'm just going to turn off all of these layers here of our crowd and just kind of show you how I do rotoscoping on a shot, especially that has a lot of camera movement in here. So like I said, since our camera is already tracked, I can create a layer now. Just create a new solid. And I'm going to name this our, for example, singer matte. And it can be whatever color. Maybe let's make it maybe gray color. And you kind of, again, you want to basically place this where the singer is in 3D space. So make it a 3D layer by selecting this option here. And since we already have our point, this null that we know is basically represents where the singer's head is, then I can go to position, just go Control C to copy it, and I can go to position here on our singer matte, and again Control V to paste it. So here's what happened. Basically now our singer matte is in the exact same place where the track null object is. And now the next thing I can do is to just basically scale it and adjust it so that it basically covers our singer here. So somewhere there you can place it. You can make it kind of semi-transparent just so we can see what's happening. So again, I know that our singer is is only in this area, so we don't need this layer to be that big. So we can again scale it down. Maybe somewhere there. And again, I also know that our stage is there, so anything below the stage, I don't really have to worry about masking. So I'm gonna just kind of drag it now and make sure that the square is covering where our singer is. And it is covering him, so that's good. So now I can just basically go and start masking him out. So very simple. I'm gonna take this layer now, take our pen tool, and I can also hide just so we're not looking at these the nulls there. They're not distracting. I can hide those nulls. And now I just have to basically rotoscope him. So I'm gonna create a simple mask like this, something like that. You can be as detailed as you want to be about this. It's really up to you. And then, you know, and again, depends on the shot. If you're gonna see a lot of details, then maybe you have to be really detailed. In this case, I think if I go sort of like this, like what you see me doing, I think it should be detailed enough. And here, go kind of a little bit more in detail about it around his hand. And again, once it goes here below the stage, I don't really have to worry about it because, again, the crowd will not be visible there. So you don't want to definitely create yourself extra work in in rotoscope everything when you know that you don't need to in certain places. So save yourself time. So something like that. Unfortunately, rotoscoping is a little time consuming. There's really not much you can do about it. Sometimes you just got to do it. But kind of the technique I'm going to show you of doing the mask on a layer like this is definitely going to be helpful. So now we have this layer, we have this mask here, and I'm going to key the path because it's obviously going to change. So this is our last frame. And here, as our shot progresses, kind of we're going backwards now. Let's see, somewhere to here, I'm going to go and readjust our mask. So the main thing that's changed is actually his head hasn't moved much, as you see here. But what has moved is his arms. So I am going to select now, for example, like this arm, just those points, and just rotate it and kind of try to, again, match it more or less to here. Maybe scale this like that. And then you just kind of have to still go in point by point and kind of readjust this. So there we have it. I'm going to do the same thing for the other arm. And then just fine tune those points a little bit. And, as you can see, definitely you do have to put in the time. But the good thing is that you do not have to create a keyframe for every frame. And the reason is because, the camera is actually, like a lot of the motion is actually the camera. Like in this case, the singer himself is not moving that much. It's the camera that's moving. So as you can see, I created one keyframe here, at the end, and now here pretty much in the middle of the comp. And if I just kind of scroll through it, you can see it's already pretty much there matching it. And that's because all the basically kind of little bumps and movements in the camera, those are taken care of for me because this layer is actually a 3D layer, right? That's floating. So, for example, now I can go like, let's say to the beginning, do the position where his arms are completely down, and let's say maybe in the middle here, and again readjust the keyframe, right, of our mask. Now, once you've done this, then next thing you're going to do is you're going to make the opacity back, to 100 on this mask, and we can hide this layer actually, and we'll move it above our crowd because we want to make sure that it's basically we're bringing back the details basically of that shot there where the crowd is. And then we're going to take our original here footage that we have, and we're going to also duplicate it. And we're going to bring it also above the crowd, but right underneath this matte layer. So right now, if I, for example, now, reveal this or hide this top layer, you can see our crowd up here. Well, like I said, I want to reveal this singer, but just basically in this area where he is. So the crowd is not kind of showing through his shirt. So here's the layer with the singer, and here's our matte on top of it. So like I said, we're hiding the matte, but here we're gonna reveal here in the columns. You want to go to the mode, and then here in the track matte, you're gonna basically select the alpha matte and singer matte. So you gotta make sure, because basically it's picking whatever is above the layer that's above it. So it's choosing the singer matte. We want to use the matte from it. So click on that, and now look at this. Our singer looks like he's now, basically on top of the crowd, or the crowd is behind him. And basically, like I said, now you can kind of go through and kind of, again, frame by frame, pretty much adjust the mask here on your singer matte, and your original footage is going to show through it. Now, another trick I'll show you is, for example, because in here, because we have so much, of this kind of these layers with the crowd, and as you can see, it takes a while to preview it. What you can do is, for example, you can hide the crowd right now, but so that you can still see how your masking is going, you can create a simple layer, a solid. Maybe let's make it red, so it's like a distinguishable color, and call it, for example, crowd stand-in. So basically, it's going to represent where our crowd is going to be. We're going to put this underneath our layer here with the singer. And again, we're going to adjust it, because we don't need it to be everywhere, obviously, because the crowd is only going to be more or less there. So we're going to make it like this. We'll make it a 3D layer, actually. And I don't know, let me redo that mask here with just here. So somewhere there. And now I can kind of preview it, and I know that I want to make sure that I'm rotoscoping so that wherever that red area is, it's appearing behind our singer. And here, this is kind of how it's looking. As you can see here, obviously here we haven't done it, so when he completely drops his arms, it's not cutting it out properly. But as you can see here, the ending is pretty much done now. So you can very quickly now do that. And so here, as you can see, after about 2 hours of rotoscoping, maybe a little bit less. I wasn't keeping track of it, but as you can see, I created various masks now. So I created a stage mask. So that's this one here, this layer, and it's the same concept. And then even for our singer, I created, you can see, one mask for him, and then another one for the microphone. Now the microphone doesn't move, so I pretty much just had to create one keyframe, and then the rest was the camera movement. So that's kind of how fast and easily you can basically rotoscope it. Now notice that once his hands go below the stage, because again, it's not going to be visible in the final shot, there's no crowd there, I didn't worry about rotoscoping the hands and every detail there. So that's why I was able to do it pretty fast, because like I said, if I didn't use this trick, then it would still take, it would take a lot longer. So now it doesn't mean that you don't have to spend the time. You do, but at least this way you can rotoscope it nicely. So once you're happy with your rotoscoping, you can hide this to the red layer, and we can basically continue putting in our crowd. So kind of duplicating it, row by row. So you could even just take like this whole row of people. Like if we go again to our two views here, make sure this one is from the top, the view, there it is. So you can see here, this is our layer here with all of our crowd. So you can select those all those little guys there, and we can again go Control D to duplicate it, and we can move it away, kind of further away in Z axis. And again, you want to kind of fill in all the different stages all the way up until that second, basically, the null that represents the back row, basically there, or the spotlight. So here we have that null there that represents that. So you can see it's up here. So all the way between here, basically where our first null is, the front row. So from here, basically from this object all the way to that object, we want to kind of fill in with the crowd. So our second row, for example, is here. And it's really up to you how far you want it to be. We'll kind of, let's say, move it up. And now obviously it's going to be, we don't want to duplicate the crowd like this so it's identical. So you want to again move them around, the kind of your little guys, so that again you can you can basically make sure that you're that it just doesn't look so repetitive. So again, let's see, maybe offset the here this spot here, maybe move this guy there, like stuff like that. So and again, this is going to take a bit of time, but you're just going to keep on doing this and kind of duplicating and copying and doing all this stuff until you end up basically filling in your whole crowd, your whole stadium basically here, or all of your seats with your little fake crowd. So I'm just gonna kind of duplicate this again, just gonna show you. See there we have our second row, and then again the idea is the same for the next row. So again, I'll go here to my top view, select our guys here, go duplicate, so Control D, move it back in space here, then here move it up again. Once you have it there in a spot that you like it, then again you start kind of going in there and and start adjusting their position again a little bit further, maybe a little bit higher, things like that, until you end up with something like this. So as you can see here, we have a whole lot of people that we duplicated, and it's actually a lot of layers. It's around what is it showing me here, 288 layers I believe we have. So here if I just extend my workspace here, you can see all of these as I'm scrolling through it. All of these are just mostly layers of the crowd. So this takes a bit of time. You obviously kind of want to again fill in all the gaps, place it in spots where it doesn't look so repetitive and things like that. Now, next thing you'll notice is that the crowd obviously is way too bright. It's really noticeable and that kind of stuff. So now, once you have your crowd and you're happy how it looks, really the next job is to start basically, kind of adjusting the colors and all the little things, to basically make it blend in better with the original shot. So the first thing I'm going to do is just adjust the colors of one of the groups of crowds. So go to our crowd one, for example, comp here, and in the effects, for example, I have these kind of effects here. Basically color balance I did. So if you look at it, it's the hue, lightness, saturation. So I brought the lightness down -45, saturation down. Then the next thing I'm gonna do is, and I'm also gonna kind of show it against the black background, so you can see difference before, after, definitely darker. I also applied a blue photo filter. There you have it, and then also a slight brightness and contrast adjustment at the end. And with these effects applied now, here we can see how our shot looks. And the cool thing is that because we're using these comps, so basically whatever we do to those crowd layers and those separate comps, it's going to automatically update in our shot up here. Now, definitely you can see some of them there are darker, but we gotta now apply it to basically more of this crowd. So we're gonna duplicate that effect and do the same thing in all of the other layers, so or all of the other comps for the crowd. So, and I just select this effects here, Control C, and I'm gonna start applying it here. So this crowd and this crowd also, and this crowd also. There it is, and crowd 5 also. And now we can go back to our shot here and again see how it looks. And now, as you can see, definitely the crowd kind of fits in a lot better with the kind of the colors of our shot. Now it's still, first of all, it's too sharp, and that's one thing. And also it's just kind of too visible there. So we're gonna have to introduce depth of field, because like I said, as the crowd gets further and further away, it should definitely be out of focus, especially the people there in the back. As you can see, the lamps that were there were very, very, out of focus. But also another thing that happens when you kind of, for example, if you were to look at the original shot, is that the original shot has, and that this will happen with any kind of shot, the further back you go, the more kind of a haze or behind atmosphere certain things are. So there's less contrast, less detail, that kind of stuff. So the way we can do that, fix it, is first of all, I'm actually going to make all of this crowd not be 100% transparent. So I'm going to select all of this, our crowd layers, press T for transparency, and I'm going to put in value of 50, for example. So make it 50% transparent. And you can see right away it again blends in a little bit better. But now what I'm going to do is that if we progressively go back, I'm going to make it darker and darker basically. So we can go again in our two views here, and I'm going to select the next layer of people, and again go here to where we selected these layers, press T for transparency, and maybe make it 45, you know, and kind of I'm going to keep on decreasing basically the transparency of all these layers. So to select the next row of people, again make it maybe 40%, and so on and so on. And our here last few rows, maybe we'll just make them all 15% maybe. We definitely don't want to make it more transparent than that. But anyways, now we did that, and again we can see kind of how it looks. So you can see it progressively gets kind of darker and kind of harder to see, and that makes sense because again, as the crowd gets further and further back, you should be able to, like I said, to kind of see them less and less. So you know, and the contrast and everything, because they're so transparent, it becomes basically it's just harder to see them. So that right away makes it sound look better. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add depth of field. Now depth of field is easy because we have an actual 3D camera. So if you look at it here, here's our camera here, our two views. So from the top view, here's our camera, and all I have to do is basically just turn on the depth of field here. So I'm going to turn it on in the 3D camera options, and you can see here now it kind of blurs our crowd. And now you do want to also always make sure that your focus distance, which is here, this option, is it's at least focused properly. So in this shot, it was actually the focus was always on the singer. And again, because of our layers, we know that here's our null for the singer. So that's where it is. So I want to make sure that this focus distance, if I move it, see, this is the plane, this is basically where it's focusing, that it's basically placed where the singer is. Because if I place it like really, really far, then you'll notice that now basically the crowd in the front there has a focus set on it. So I want to move it back to where it was, so it's focused there on the singer. And then this way, that means that progressively this, you know, the crowd there is going to get, everything's going to get kind of blurry. And you can adjust the, you know, for example, what kind of, how much blur you want, the aperture, whether you want it to be really open or closed, so, you know, how much of a depth of field you're going to have, and even the shape of the iris I chose, because, you know, our lens set is nice kind of a round one, so I put a hexagon, and that seems to match it pretty well. So this is how our shot looks. Now the last thing I would say is you can notice here still like this crowd around where the light is, because again the original shot just, you know, did not have basically anything there, and there was a lot of this haze basically that was being lit by this spotlight. I would say that you want to kind of add another mask that kind of again brings back some of this original kind of a bright area, and I'm going to do that. Here I'm going to show you the way I did it. Is very simple. Here we have our masks of the singer, like I said. So here it is, our mask of the singer, and the microphone, all that stuff. There's one of the stage. Well, I created the same idea again. I brought our original footage here, and I just basically created a mask for it using this thing. So I created, as you can see, I masked out the area around the light and then kind of where the spotlight is. But instead of making it, you know, 100%, for example, I made it, if you can see the different masks, I adjusted the mask opacity, for example, for where the circle is to only 70%. The mask opacity for basically where this whole basically spotlight is, I did it at 58%, and you just kind of want to, you know, trace it. And again, depending on your shot, maybe you want in your shot you wouldn't have to do that, but you kind of want to adjust the intensity of that so that see, this is without it now. This is without that layer that I kind of put on top of it. But now with that layer, as you can see, wherever there's that spotlight, the crowd is not visible. So it's like a subtle thing, but it again just makes it more believable, because again, wherever is the spotlight is where you should be seeing more of that haze. So yeah, so that's the reason why I kind of put that in there. So this is how our shot looks now. Definitely now we can see with that crowd there and our spotlight, and it just looks, you know, a lot more alive. Definitely a bigger crowd turnout than when I was there on the stage with the guitar. But you know, and it looks good. Looks like there's actually all these people there, you know, filling up these seats. Now, obviously, one thing you would expect to see at a concert is either people holding, you know, candles like back in the day, or their cell phones, or at least some camera flashes, right? You're gonna have people, if they're really big fans, they're gonna be taking photos. And again, that's a simple effect that you can do. And just like this whole tutorial that I showed you, I did not use any special, you know, plugins or filters or anything like that. Just basically Adobe After Effects. If you have, you know, the full or student version, you can do this effect yourself. So let me show you quickly how I basically do the camera flashes. So create a new layer, new solid, make it black in this case. Call it camera flashes 1, for example. Might do a few of these layers. I want the transfer mode on this layer to be add. So it's basically going to add anything, any kind of bright areas on top of our underneath the layer, or basically all of our compositions. Or so it's going to add basically any kind of a bright object on this layer is going to be visible on the layers underneath it. And then now in the effects here, or you can just right click on the footage, go to effects, generate, and I'm going to do a lens flare. And you can just kind of, you know, again, pick where you want the, you know, the flash to go from. Now, obviously it shouldn't be this bright. Maybe make it 8%, something like that. I don't want it to be that red. Maybe I'll choose the 105mm prime. Yeah, that kind of looks like it matches more our shot here. And you just want to now animate it, which is pretty simple. So we want to animate the center of this. So, you know, keyframe this. Also, I'm going to animate the brightness. So press the stopwatch next to that, create our keyframes. And then I'm going to go 1 frame back, and I'm going to make the brightness 0. So now suddenly you have this kind of, you know, little spot there appear. And then maybe 2 frames further, I'm going to make the flare again disappear. So make it 0. And as far as the position, it's only visible in these 2 frames. So I'm going to also keyframe this because I don't want it to move while the flare is there. And now you can kind of basically duplicate this if you wanted to. Just select these keyframes and let's say paste them here, all throughout these areas here. And the only thing you got to change now is the position, right? So again, we'll go maybe in this case the flare is here. And I'll copy the position to the next frame. So now we have it kind of flashing up here. Maybe up here where we have it, we'll again move it. So we have another flare here, or maybe here, or maybe closer to the crowd. And in this case, I'm going to copy the position again. And I'm going to also adjust the brightness of it. So I'm actually going to make the brightness in this case maybe 15%. So it kind of varies a little bit. Some of the flashes are going to be brighter. For example, this one's brighter than, for example, the one that happens here later on. But definitely you want to readjust the position so that it's not it doesn't look like it's the only one person in the crowd, you know, having that camera flash going off. So maybe this one there, another one maybe again, maybe move it to somewhere here. And again, I'm gonna maybe just to offset it, adjust the position. I mean the intensity, maybe make it 13%. Maybe here also we'll adjust the position, maybe something like this. And then again, the intensity will maybe make it to maybe a little bit stronger, maybe 19%. Got a really strong flash there. And as you can see, this is kind of how it's looking now. So if I preview it, well, we see you have these quick little flashes that seem like they're coming off from the crowd. And then next thing you can do is, you know, just make it, just duplicate it. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. And again, I'm going to go into our effects here, keyframes. And again, just offset these, put them in different places, you know, kind of move it around. Just to kind of vary it, right? And then just kind of see how it's looking. Again, just quickly preview it. If you like how it looks, you know, then that's great. If you want more flashes, then again, duplicate this this layer and again offset it. until you end up with something that you're happy. And in my case, this is how the final shot looks. Now, obviously, when I put it into the finished music video, then I'm gonna apply now the color correction. The music video actually is supposed to be widescreen aspect ratio, so in this case I'm just gonna add widescreen bars, but the final video will actually be rendered in that aspect ratio, and that's kind of how it looks here in the final music video. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, share this video, subscribe if you haven't already. If you did, but you want to be notified of all my future videos, tutorials and film gear reviews and all that other cool stuff, make sure you hit that bell notification button. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks and bye!